your cell phones and your beepers, Blackberries off, because Blackberries even interfere with the PowerPoint. And let me also remind you that the books are for sale at the back of the room, so please take advantage of that. I'm Skip Rutherford, Dean of the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. During the 2006-2007 school year, we have been privileged to offer already over 100 free public programs for our students, for the community, and for the state. You have on your chairs a listing of our upcoming April and May programs. But let me elevate one of particular interest. The former president of Middlebury College, Dr. John McCardle, will be here on Monday, April 30th, to discuss whether the legalized drinking age should be lowered to 18. This program will begin at noon. Dr. McCardle's recent article on this topic in the Chronicle of Higher Education has sparked great national interest and debate. And the Clinton School, I believe, is his first forum since that article was published. So I hope you will make reservations to attend his presentation. In addition to those of you who personally attend and have attended our programs, since December 2006, over 800,000 people have used our research center to access or review them. This means that students, educators, scholars, and journalists from all over the state, the country, and the world are taking advantage of this speaker series. This public service outreach is just one example of what a graduate program in public service should be doing. And our Research Center website is listed on the back of the flyer that you have. It's fair to say over the past year that the quality, the quantity, and the diversity of the Clinton School Speaker Series has reached a level that one might expect at Harvard, at Georgetown, or at Oxford. The person who will introduce tonight's special guest is the individual largely responsible for this Arkansas success story. He is a native of North Carolina, an honors graduate of the University of Nebraska, and the director of the public programs at the Clinton School. Would you please welcome Mr. Patrick Kennedy.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dean Rutherford, and thank you, Dean, for bringing this mission to the Clinton School and having these programs here at Little Rock and in Arkansas. I've had a great time working with the school. I really appreciate all the support of everyone in the community coming to the programs and giving me ideas. So continue to give me ideas. I'd also like to thank the many staff and volunteers who have dedicated their time and efforts to providing these programs. Without you all, it wouldn't have happened. So thank you very much. This is an important moment with this lecture tonight. This is an important moment for the Clinton School, for Arkansas, and the South to have the opportunity to listen, to learn, and to debate with perhaps one, if not the, most influential public intellectuals of our time. The reach of his ideas go far beyond science and into an abstract and interconnected theory which in some way has connected us, has touched us all. Before coming to the Clinton School, I spent years as a researcher in the cognitive, biochemical, and genetic sciences. And when asked by professors why I chose to, they teasingly mocked me to go to the dark side of politics, public service, and law. I tell them that it was because of a scientific mistake. While working in a genetics lab late one night with yeast, of all things, I watched a lonely and discontent mutant cell transform itself into a mountain of clones, ruining months of experimentation, pretty much my thesis too, at that moment. But in that instance, I came to find a new meaning in what Darwin called the struggle for existence. The same principles that lead us as humanity to serve, to struggle, to fight for progress, are artistically and eloquently expressed in the underlying code of the double helix of DNA, a language of contradiction that weaves, twists, and blends pluralism and indifference into an unnatural but beautiful formation, much like that of society. As we learn to coexist and find meaning in our lives as different but almost identical individuals, the lessons taught and emphasized by our speaker tonight throughout his long and illustrious career as an educator speaks to the essence of progress and change across disciplinary boundaries while attacking assumption, convention, and intellectual apathy along the way. Dr. Clinton Richard Dawkins has come to share his views with us a little while tonight, and we're thankful for that. Dr. Dawkins currently holds the Charles Simonian Chair for the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University, where he has taught for over 35 years. His first book, The Shellfish Gene, which was published in 1976, popularized the gene-centered view of evolution. In 1982, he authored The Extended Phenotype, which extended Darwinism beyond the individual. Dawkins has continued to write a number of books and articles in a lot of different fields, from popular science to alternative medicine, and even now to religion in his most recent book, The God Delusion. He has delivered a number of inaugural and other notable lectures, including the Henry Sedgwick, Erasmus Darwin, and T.H. Huxley Memorial Lectures. Professor Dawkins holds a number of honorary doctorates in science and has won numerous awards, including the Royal Society of Literature Award, the Los Angeles Times Literary Prize, and the Humanist of the Year Award. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, whether you love him or hate him, Richard Dawkins infuses a spirit of intellectual excitement throughout the world, which is evidenced by this overwhelming response tonight. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Dawkins.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is true that my first name, little used, is Clinton. It is a great pleasure to be here for the first time in the home state of the greatest president in my lifetime. I've become accustomed when going around the United States to being told over and over again, "Have a nice day." The difference is that in Arkansas, you mean it. And it has a good chance of being true, of coming true. My lecture tonight is largely based on my latest book, The God Delusion, and it is, of course, about religion, and you will gather that I am against it. Religion is common enough to be called a human universal, along with heterosexual desire and incest avoidance. These are not literally universal across all individuals. Some of us escape some of them, but all cultures have them, and every individual who departs knows what it is he has departed from. Religion is a human universal in that sense. Isn't it a remarkable coincidence? Almost everyone who is religious has the same religion as their parents. And it always just happens to be the right religion. Religion tends to run in families. If we'd been brought up in ancient Greece, we'd all be worshipping Zeus and Apollo. If we'd been born Vikings, we'd all be worshipping Wotan and Thor. One by one, those ancient belief systems have vanished unlamented from the face of the earth. Zeus with his thunderbolts, Apollo, Wotan, Thor with his hammer, Baal, Mithras, Amun-Ra, all once worshipped as gods. People believed in them, prayed to them, sacrificed to them. Lots of people. They were intimately intertwined with their respective cultures and literatures. Children were brought up in the knowledge of them, told of their certain existence, a matter of undoubted fact. Nowadays, everybody agrees that no matter how sincere those believers undoubtedly were in their own time, they were deluded. Every one of those gods was a delusion, and so were hundreds of others that anthropologists have described all around the world. Some of us just go one god further. America, founded in secularism as a beacon of 18th century enlightenment, is becoming the victim of religious politics, a circumstance that would have horrified the founding fathers. The political ascendancy today, in the post-Clinton era, values embryonic cells over real people. It obsesses about gay marriage ahead of genuinely important issues that actually make a difference in the world. It gains crucial electoral support from a constituency whose grip on reality is so tenuous that they expect to be raptured up to heaven, leaving their clothes as empty as their minds. More extreme specimens actually long for nuclear war, which they identify as the Armageddon that is to presage the Second Coming. Sam Harris, in his wonderful book, Letter to a Christian Nation, hits the bullseye as usual. I quote, "It is therefore not an exaggeration to say that if the city of New York was suddenly replaced by a ball of fire, some significant percentage of the American population would see a silver lining in the subsequent mushroom cloud, as it would suggest to them that the best thing that is ever going to happen was about to happen, the return of Christ. Imagine the consequences if any significant component of the US government actually believed that the world was about to end and that its ending would be glorious. The fact that nearly half of the American population apparently believes this, purely on the basis of religious dogma, should be considered a moral and intellectual emergency." My scientific colleagues have additional reasons to declare emergency. Ignorant and absolutist attacks on stem cell research are just the tip of an iceberg. What we have here is nothing less than a global assault on rationality and the Enlightenment values that inspired the founding of this first and greatest of secular republics. Science education, and hence the whole future of science in this country, is under threat. Temporarily beaten back in a Pennsylvania court, the breathtaking inanity, to quote Judge John Jones's immortal phrase, of intelligent design continually flares up in local bushfires. Dousing them is a time-consuming but important responsibility. Scientists are having to waste their time doing it. They are finally being jolted out of their complacency. For years, scientists quietly got on with their science, lamentably underestimating the creationists who, being neither competent nor interested in science, attended to the serious political business of subverting local school boards. Scientists and intellectuals generally are now finally waking up to the threat from the American Taliban. The God delusion is my goodwill contribution from across the Atlantic to that awakening. The scientific error that we're talking about is non-trivial. Some significant percentage of the population of this country, some polls put it as high as 50%, believes that the world is 6,000 years old. This is not some minor disagreement of a scientific detail. The true age of the Earth, according to science, is approximately 4.6 billion years. To give you an idea of the scale of the disagreement, believing that the world is 6,000 years old is equivalent to believing that the width of North America is approximately 8 yards. One of those who believes that is Professor Kurt Wise of William Jennings Bryan College. He was a very promising geologist, paleontologist, undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago, doctorate at Harvard under Stephen Jay Gould, no less. Promising career in geology, which he desperately wanted to fulfill. But he was bitterly troubled by his religious upbringing. He recognized the contradiction between his science and his religion. And one day he could bear it no longer. He took a Bible and a pair of scissors and he went right through the Bible, physically cutting out every verse of the Bible that would have to go if he accepted the full implications of his science. I quote, "Try as I might, and even with the benefit of intact margins throughout the pages of Scripture, I found it impossible to pick up the Bible without it being rent in two. I had to make a decision between evolution and Scripture. Either the Scripture was true and evolution was wrong, or evolution was true and I was tossed out of the Bible. It was there that night that I accepted the Word of God and rejected all that would ever counter it, including evolution. With that, in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science." A personal tragedy. He goes on, Kurt Wise goes on. "Although there are scientific reasons for accepting a young Earth, and young Earth means 6,000 years, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the Scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand." Recognize the last bit as a quotation from Luther. That is a tragic illustration of how religion can rot an otherwise intelligent mind. An extreme example, admittedly. There are plenty of perfectly good scientists who combine evolution with religion. But this extreme example shows what can happen. One of my main aims is not to impart facts, and certainly not to indoctrinate, but to raise consciousness. It was the feminists who raised my consciousness to the power of consciousness raising. Even those of us who still use man instead of human do so with an air of self-conscious apology or truculence, taking a stand, for example, for traditional language or even deliberately to rile feminists. But all participants in the zeitgeist, whether they're feminist or anti-feminist, have had their consciousness raised, even if some of them respond by digging in their heels and redoubling the offence. Consciousness raising of a different kind is what I'm about. Here's an example. At Christmas time, one year, my daily newspaper in Britain, The Independent, was looking for a seasonal picture, and they found a heartwarming, ecumenical one to school nativity play. The three wise men were played by Shabrit, a Sikh, Musharraf, a Muslim, and Adele, a Christian, all aged 4. Now just imagine the outcry if the caption had read, Shabrit, a monetarist, Musharraf, a Keynesian, and Adele, a Marxist, all aged 4. Ladies and gentlemen, that is consciousness raising. I don't need to spell it out. Suppose the caption had read Shabrit, an atheist, Musharraf, an agnostic, and Adele a secular humanist. Why do we grant religion a free pass to label children in this abusive way? There is no such thing as a Catholic child. There is no such thing as a Protestant child. There is no such thing as a Muslim child. There is a child of Catholic parents, a child of Protestant parents, a child of Muslim parents, but at least if we're talking about 4-year-olds, there is no more a Catholic child than there is a monetarist child, or a Marxist child, or a secular humanist child. I hope that your consciousness has been raised, and if ever you hear a sentence which includes the phrase Catholic child or Christian child, you will flinch, wince. Here's some more consciousness raising. This time it's about science. Scientists publish their research in journals like the Quarterly Review of Biology, and I have made up a kind of spoof edition of the Quarterly Review of Biology. This is a special edition, a special issue of the journal, concerned with the controversial question of how did the dinosaurs go extinct? Did an asteroid kill the dinosaurs? You could easily imagine that the Quarterly Review of Biology would have a special issue devoted to this controversial and interesting question. The first paper is a standard scientific paper. Iridium layer at KT boundary and potassium-argon dated crater in Yucatan indicate that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Read that paper and you know you're going to get some science. The President of the Royal Society has been vouchsafed a strong inner conviction that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. It has been privately revealed to Professor Huxley that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Hornby was brought up to have total and unquestioning faith that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Hawkins has promulgated an official dogma binding on all loyal Hawkinsians that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. I hope that this too has raised your consciousness to what religion is all about when it tries to pronounce on factual issues about the universe. Here is a map indicating predominant religion in different parts of the world. And if you saw such a map, you would probably attest, you'd think it perfectly natural and perfectly normal, that it's possible to shade the map of the world in different colours according to predominant religion. Suppose we did the same thing for the controversy about why the dinosaurs went extinct. You see the preposterousness of it. In certain areas of the world, wine in the communion service merely symbolises blood. In other areas of the world, it becomes blood. In certain areas of the world, there are hundreds of gods. In other areas, there is only one God. My book is called The God Delusion, and I need to make it clear that the God I'm talking about is a personal, intelligent, creative being like Yahweh, Allah, Baal, Wotan, Zeus, or Lord Krishna. If, on the other hand, by God you mean nature, or goodness, or the universe, or the laws of physics, or the spirit of humanity, or Planck's constant, we're going to be talking at cross purposes. I need to get this out of the way first. An American student asked her professor whether he had a view about me. Sure, he replied, his positive science is incompatible with religion, but he waxes ecstatic about nature and the universe. To me, that is religion. Well, if that's what you choose to mean by religion, that's fine, and it makes me a very religious man. But if your God is a being who designs universes, listens to prayers, forgives sins, reaps miracles, reads your thoughts, cares about your welfare, and raises you from the dead, you're unlikely to be satisfied. As the distinguished American Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg said, if you want to say that God is energy, then you can find God in a lump of coal. But don't expect congregations to flock to your church. I call this kind of pantheistic religion Einsteinian religion. And it's hard to see how anybody could object strongly to it. And I certainly don't, except that I think it's confusing. When Einstein said, did God have a choice in creating the universe, what he really meant was, could the universe have begun in more than one way? A very interesting scientific question. God does not play dice was Einstein's poetic way of doubting Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle. Einstein was famously irritated when theists misunderstood him to mean a personal God. But what did he expect? The hunger to misunderstand should have been palpable to him. Religious physicists usually turn out to be so only in the Einsteinian sense. They are atheists of a poetic disposition, and so am I. But given the widespread yearning for that great misunderstanding, deliberately to confuse Einsteinian religion with supernatural religion is, in my opinion, an act of intellectual high treason. So, I want to accept that the God hypothesis, the hypothesis of a supernatural God, is a proper scientific hypothesis whose truth or falsehood is hidden from us only by careful evidence. There either is a God or there isn't. The God is a supernatural intelligence. He's either there or he's not. Some more illustrations of poetic Einsteinian science. This is the great Indian astrophysicist Subramanian Chandrasekhar. This shuddering before the beautiful, this incredible fact that a discovery motivated by a search after the beautiful in mathematics should find its exact replica in nature, persuades me to say that beauty is that to which the human mind responds at its deepest and most profound. John Wheeler, great American physicist. We will grasp the central idea of it all as so simple, so beautiful, so compelling, that we will all say each to the other, oh, how could it have been otherwise? How could we all have been so blind for so long? Carl Sagan. How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more connected. Instead they say, no, 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 my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge. Well, if it does, it will be of the Einsteinian variety, not of the supernatural variety. Deism is rather different. Deists do believe in a supernatural God, but the supernatural God doesn't do most of the things that theists believe in. He merely designs the universe and then retires. The theistic God does all that, but then intervenes in human affairs, performs miracles, answers prayers, punishes, and redeems. In the God delusion, I erected a 7-point scale of religiosity, Number 1 is I know there is a God. Number 7 is I know there is no God. I'm about a 6.8. I don't believe you can actually disprove the existence of God, nor can you disprove the existence of Baal or Mithras. Bertrand Russell used the analogy of a celestial teapot in orbit around the sun. He pointed out that you couldn't actually disprove the existence of the celestial teapot, but this doesn't mean that you are in any serious sense agnostic about it. Technically you have to be agnostic, but there is a mistaken tendency to feel that agnosticism implies a kind of 50-50 likelihood. We all of us technically have to be agnostic about God, as we have to be about fairies and teapots. But that doesn't commit us to thinking that it's 50-50, 50% likely. It is perfectly likely that we could come to a different estimate. And a lot of misunderstanding flows from this tendency to regard agnosticism as 50-50. Stephen Jay Gould, in his book advocating NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, said of the existence of God, we neither affirm nor deny it, we simply can't comment on it as scientists. Well, I think we can comment on it. We can't be sure either way, but we don't have to say, therefore, it is 50-50, like the toss of a coin. We can say, I think it's 90% likely that there is no God, or 90% likely that there is a God. I do think it's a scientific question. A universe with a God would be a completely different kind of universe from one without, and it would be a scientific difference. God himself could clinch the matter in his favour at any moment by staging a spectacular demonstration of his powers. Even the infamous Templeton Foundation recognised that God is a scientific hypothesis by funding well-conducted double-blind trials to test whether remote prayer would speed the recovery of heart patients. It didn't, although a control group who knew that they had been prayed for actually got rather worse. To see the disingenuousness of those religious people who claim to embrace NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, total separation of science from religion. Imagine that forensic archaeologists, by some unlikely set of circumstances, discovered DNA evidence demonstrating that Jesus was born of a virgin mother and had no father. If the advocates of NOMA were really sincere, they should immediately say, irrelevant, scientific evidence has no bearing on theological questions, entirely separate magisterium. Does anyone seriously imagine that that's what they'd say if DNA evidence was actually found showing that Jesus had no father? Either Jesus had a father or he didn't. The question is a scientific one. Scientific evidence, if any were available, would be used to settle it. And the same is true of any miracle. And the deliberate creation, the intentional creation of the universe would have to have been the mother and father of all miracles. Either it happened or it didn't. It's a fact one way or the other. And in our state of uncertainty, we can put a probability on it, an estimate that may change like any other scientific estimate as more information comes in. Humanity's best estimate of the probability of divine creation dropped steeply, if not to zero, dropped steeply in 1859 when The Origin of Species was published, and it's continued to decline since then. Most of the traditional arguments for God's existence from Thomas Aquinas on are pretty easily demolished. Several of them, such as the first cause argument, work by setting up an infinite regress, which God is then allowed to terminate. We're never told why God is magically able to terminate a regress. But the One argument which is still widely popular is the so-called argument from design. In the familiar world of human artifacts like watches, complicated things that look designed are designed. To a naive observer, it seems to follow that similarly complex things in the animal world or natural world, like eyes and hearts, are designed too. It's not just an argument by analogy, there is a semblance of reasoning, statistical reasoning here too. It's fallacious, but it carries an illusion of plausibility. If you took the parts of a watch, or the parts of a heart or an eye, and if you randomly scrambled the fragments 1,000,000 times, you would be lucky to hit even one combination that could tell the time, or see, or hear, or whatever the organ does. This demonstrates that such devices could not have been put together by chance. And of course, no sensible scientist ever said they could. But lamentably, the scientific education of most British and American students omits all mention of Darwinism, and therefore the only alternative to random chance that most people can imagine is design. The great English astronomer Fred Hoyle dramatized his own misunderstanding of natural selection by the analogy of a hurricane blowing through a junkyard, having the good fortune to assemble at random a Boeing 747. Even before Darwin's time, the impotence of the argument from design was glaring. How could it ever have been a good idea to postulate, in explanation of the existence of complex, improbable things such as eyes, how could it ever have been a good idea to postulate a designer who would have to have been even more complex and improbable than that which is being invoked to explain? The entire argument always was a logical non-starter, as the great philosopher David Hume realized before Darwin was born. What Hume didn't know was the supremely elegant alternative to both chance and design that Darwin was to give us. Natural selection is so stunningly powerful and elegant. It not only explains the whole of life, it actually raises our consciousness again, boosts our confidence in science's future ability to explain anything else. Essentially, what's wrong with creationism, in the words of the philosopher Daniel Dennett, or by the way, intelligent design is creationist, don't let anyone fool you into thinking it's not. Essentially, what's wrong with it is that it's what Daniel Dennett calls a skyhook. A skyhook explains nothing at all, except in terms of something larger, which is even more strongly in need of explanation. A great hand from the sky descends magically and does the work of apparently explaining. And it explains nothing, because you're left wondering where the hand from the sky comes from. Real explanations, in Dennett's terminology, are cranes. Cranes really do explanatory work. They lift. Natural selection is the crane par excellence. Natural selection starts from simple beginnings. Simplicity, by definition, is easy to understand, and it works its way gradually up. It pulls the explanation upwards by slow, gradual degrees. And that's characteristic of all explanations that we call cranes, which are good explanations. Natural selection is not just an alternative to chance, it's the only ultimate alternative ever suggested. What you see there is on the right a real rose thorn, and on the left a collection of buds which mimic rose thorns, because natural selection has favoured those buds which resemble rose thorns, predators avoid them. If, as the great molecular biologist Francis Crick and his colleague Leslie Orwell once playfully speculated, life on this planet was originally seeded by intelligent life somewhere else, bacteria in the nose cone of a rocket, we still need an explanation for the intelligent aliens who dispatched the rocket. Ultimately, they must have evolved by gradual degrees from simpler beginnings. But only evolution or some equally gradualistic crane is capable of terminating the otherwise infinite regress. Natural selection is an anti-chance process which gradually builds up complexity step by tiny step. The end product of this ratcheting process is an eye or a heart or a brain or a designer, a device whose improbable complexity is utterly baffling until you spot the gentle ramp that leads up to it. Now, the alternative, intelligent design or creationism, never offers any positive evidence in its own favour. All it does is try to search around for gaps in the explanation offered by the scientific theory. Look at the logic, or rather the illogical default. We have two theories, theory A and theory B. Theory A is supported by mountains of evidence. Theory B is supported by no evidence at all and doesn't even try to find evidence. However, an advocate of theory B comes along and says, I can't understand how theory A explains this particular little thing. Therefore, theory B must be right. Totally ignoring the question of whether theory B can explain X, and ignoring the fact that theory B has no positive evidence in its favour anyway. We are encouraged to leap to the default theory, creationism or intelligent design, without even looking to see whether it fails in the very same particular as the theory it's alleged to replace. Intelligent design is granted a charmed immunity to the rigorous demands made of evolution or any other genuinely scientific theory. Gaps, by default, are filled by God. It's a failure of the imagination, that's all you can say about it. I once described it as the argument from personal incredulity. I, personally, am unable to think of any way in which the elbow of the lesser-spotted weasel frog could have been built up by step-by-step evolution. Therefore, it must have been designed. The great theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer coined the phrase God of the gaps when he said, religious people often speak of God when human perception is often out of laziness at an end, or human resources fail. Of necessity, that can only go on until men can, by their own strength, push the borders a little further so that God becomes superfluous. End quote. A gap in present-day knowledge or understanding is eagerly sought by creationists. If they find an apparent gap, they assume that God, by default, must fill it. And of course, what worries thoughtful theologians like Bonhoeffer is that gaps shrink as science advances, and God is threatened with eventually having nowhere to hide. I think most people know what it is that makes natural selection succeed. It is the gradual smearing out of the luck into small steps. A metaphor for extreme improbability is a combination, and we can use it to explain it. A bank robber could theoretically get lucky and hit upon the right combination of the lock by chance, by luck, and open the bank vault and steal all the money. But in practice, combination locks are designed with enough improbability to make that all but impossible, at least as impossible as a hurricane blowing through a junkyard assembling a Boeing 747. But imagine a badly designed combination lock that gave out little hints progressively, like the childhood game of getting warmer, getting cooler. Suppose that when each one of the dials or each, whatever it is on the combination lock, approaches the right number, the door just opens a little bit and a little bit of money spins out. That's how natural selection works. And that's fundamentally the fallacy in the Boeing 747 analogy. The dribbling combination lock is a reasonable analogy for at least that aspect of Darwinian evolution. But God would have to be the ultimate Boeing 747. because God, as I said before, would have to be hugely improbable in exactly the same kind of way as the eye or the ear, whatever it is that we're trying to explain. Why not teach the controversy? It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? But before you're seduced by it, you have to convince yourself that there really is a controversy. You have to convince yourself that the case for the creationist view of life is any stronger than the case for teaching the controversy in reproductive biology. Equal time is only fair. Avian flu scare forces taxes to spell births. Storks might be carriers. You might say, well, that's all very well. Natural selection, evolution by natural selection works brilliantly once life has started. But what about the origin of life? Life has to start from the laws of chemistry. The origin of life, we know the kind of event it must have been. It must have been the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Probably not DNA, but something a bit like DNA. And so far, nobody has succeeded in working out how it happened, and has succeeded in reproducing it in the laboratory. Maybe it was a very, very improbable event, or maybe it wasn't, but suppose it was a very, very improbable event. We can actually allow it to be a very improbable event because it only had to happen once. Subsequent evolution instead, the evolution of legs and wings and brains and cells and eyes and ears, those happened many times. That cannot be the result of blind chance. But there could be a sense in which the origin of life itself, that chemical event that happened perhaps 4 billion years ago, was a truly improbable event. I want to explain this using the so-called Anthropic Principle. The Anthropic Principle is not usually applied to the cosmos as a whole, and I'll come to that, but I want to introduce the idea on a smaller planetary scale. We exist here on Earth. Therefore, Earth must be the kind of planet that's capable of generating and supporting us, however unusual, even unique, that kind of planet might be. For example, our kind of life can't survive without liquid water, and space scientists looking for evidence of life, the main thing they actually look for in practice is evidence of water on planets in other parts of the universe. Around a typical star, like our Sun, there's a so-called Goldilocks zone. Not too hot and not too cold, but just right. For planets with liquid water. Too far away from the star, and the water is all frozen solid. Too close to the star, and it all boils. The Goldilocks zone is liquid water, as in fact we are in the Goldilocks zone. There are other respects in which Earth's position in the solar system is propitious to the evolution of life. The massive gravitational vacuum cleaner of Jupiter is well placed to intercept asteroids that would otherwise threaten life with extinction. Now, the reason why Earth possesses all these favourable qualities is that we are here. That's a sort of paradoxical way of putting it. That's the backwards anthropic way of putting it. And it is paradoxical because it puts it backwards. There are two approaches to transforming that paradox into a sensible, forward narrative. One of them is the design approach, which says that God made the world, made it just the right size and shape, and placed it in the Goldilocks zone for our benefit. The scientific approach is very different. It has a sort of faintly Darwinian feel. The vast majority of planets in the universe, billions and billions of them, are not in the Goldilocks zone of their sun, their star, but they don't have life, at least not our kind of water-based life. We necessarily live on one of the tiny minority, as it might be, of planets where water exists and neither boils nor freezes, and where everything else is favourable to life. 1 billion is a conservative estimate for the number of planets in the universe. Suppose we allow ourselves to postulate that the origin of life on a planet is a hugely, simply stupendously improbable stroke of luck. So improbable that it only happens on 1 in 1 billion planets. The National Science Foundation would laugh at any chemist who said that the probability of his experiment succeeding was only as little as 1 in 100. We're talking about a chemical experiment whose probability of succeeding is 1 in 1 billion. Yet, if there are 1 billion planets in the universe, even such ludicrously low odds as 1 in 1 billion will yield an origin of life on 1 billion planets. And, this is where the Anthropic Principle comes in, rare as those billion planets may be in the billion, this one has to be one of the lucky ones, because here we are. It's an utterly sound logical principle. It sounds paradoxical, but it's completely sound. If you set out in a spaceship to find the one planet in the galaxy that has life, the odds against your finding it would be indistinguishable from impossible, far worse than trying to find a needle in a haystack. But if you are already alive, as you must be if you're stepping into a spaceship, you don't need to bother to go looking for the one planet that has life. You're sitting on it. I think the Anthropic Principle is really rather elegant. By the way, I don't for a moment believe that life is that rare. What I am saying is that we are allowed the luxury of postulating that it's that rare, and still have a completely satisfying explanation of the origin of life. Even accepting the most pessimistic estimate of the probability that life might spontaneously originate, this statistical argument completely demolishes any suggestion that design is going to be a helpful theory to fill the gap. All the apparent gaps in the evolutionary story, the origin of life, the very first one, might seem unbridgeable to brains calibrated to assess likelihood and risk on an everyday scale, the scale on which insurance actuaries calculate risk, for example, or the scale on which the National Science Foundation calculates whether it's worth supporting chemical research. Yet even so big a gap as this is easily filled by statistically informed science, the Anthropic Principle, while at the same time statistically informed science rules out a divine creator on the ultimate 747 grounds that I've already dealt with. However, if somebody tried to explain the general phenomenon of biological adaptation, the beauty of a hummingbird's wings, the beauty of the flowers that it pollinates, the beauty and elegance of our eyes or ears, every species in the world, tens of millions of species, if anybody tried to explain that by the same anthropic invocation of luck, they are talking complete nonsense. Don't even think about it. The reason for that is that life, as we see it, is a recurrent phenomenon. There are hundreds of millions, tens of millions at least, of species, and every one of them shows beautiful adaptation to a particular, if different, way of life. We can predict that if you go to an island that nobody's ever visited before, every plant and every animal that you find will be well adapted to its particular Goldilocks conditions. So you cannot use the sort of extreme probability argument that I use for the origin of life. You can only use that for events that only have to happen once, or very rare. Maybe you could use it for one or two other things, like the origin of consciousness, or the origin of the eukaryotic cell. Here on Earth, we're dealing with a generalized process for optimizing biological species. And we understand how that came about through Charles Darwin, who you see there, the right-hand side of the English £10 note. Thanks to Darwin, we know that, or Darwin said in his own words, natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers at the improvement of each organic being. We British nowadays don't have much opportunity for national pride. I can't resist contrasting our £10 note with the words in the middle of a dollar bill, "In God We Trust," added, I think, as late as the 1950s, isn't that true? Yes. It may be, as I say, that the origin of life is not the only major gap in the evolutionary story. It may be that the origin of the complex cell, the eukaryotic cell, is another such one-off event. And possibly the origin of consciousness might be another. If these are one-off events, then we're not dealing with a ubiquitous and all-pervading process as we are with ordinary run-of-the-mill biological adaptation. The Anthropic Principle states that since only, say, complex and conscious life forms are capable of noticing their own existence, our planet has to be one of the intensely rare planets that has bridged all three gaps: the origin of life, the origin of the eukaryotic cell, and the origin of consciousness. Now, we live not only on a friendly planet, but also in a friendly universe. The laws of physics have to be friendly enough to allow life to arise, and that means that stars have to arise because the heavier chemical elements have to arise, and they only arise in stars. So the laws of physics themselves can be regarded as having Goldilocks characteristics. Different physicists calculate it in different ways, but many physicists agree that if the laws and constants of physics had been even slightly different, the universe would have turned out not to be such as to favour life. The astronomer royal, Sir Martin Rees, lists 6 fundamental constants, which are believed to hold all around the universe. Each of these 6 numbers is finely tuned in the sense that if it were ever so slightly different, the universe would be comprehensively different and presumably unfriendly to life. Not all physicists accept this. Victor Stengler, for example, has come out against this calculation, but it does seem to be accepted by a consensus. So for each of these 6 numbers, the actual number that we observe sits near the middle of a Goldilocks band of values, outside which life, at least as we know it, would not have been possible. How should we respond to this? How should we respond to the suggestion that the laws of physics are finely tuned to bring us into existence? Well, once again, we have the theist answer and the anthropic answer. The theist answer is, it's as though there were, say, half a dozen dials, I've drawn a few more than half a dozen there, representing the major constants of physics. Each of those dials could in principle be turned, be twiddled to any of a wide range of values, and almost all of those long twiddlings would yield a universe in which life was impossible. Perhaps it fizzles out within the first picosecond. Perhaps there are no stars because the gravitational constant is wrong, and therefore there are no elements heavier than hydrogen, say. The theistic explanation is that there is a divine knob-twiddler who twiddles each of those knobs to its exactly right Goldilocks value and calculated what that value is. Now, among scientists, the hard-nosed ones, like Stephen Weinberg, whom I've already quoted, in a sense deny that there is a problem. They suggest that, in effect, the 6 knobs were never free to vary in the first place. When we finally reach the long-hoped-for theory of everything, we shall see that Martin Rees's 6 numbers depend upon each other in ways that we can't imagine. They may turn out to be no more free to vary than is the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. So far from God being needed to twiddle 6 knobs, there are no knobs to twiddle. However, other physicists find this unsatisfying. I think Martin Rees himself would be one of them. The philosopher John Leslie has used the analogy of a man sentenced to death by firing squad. It's just possible that, and he finds himself still alive after the firing squad was fired. It's just possible that all 10 men of the firing squad simply missed, and with hindsight, the victim who finds himself in a position to reflect upon his good fortune can cheerfully say, well, obviously they all missed, or I wouldn't be here to think about it. But he could still forgivably wonder why they missed. And I think that those physicists who feel that there is a problem here rather empathise with the man who survived the firing squad. It's all very well saying the laws of physics just happen to be right to bring us into existence, but why? Other physicists resort at this point to the Anthropic Principle, and Martin Rees is one of them. They postulate a multiverse, or sometimes it's called a megaverse, a foam of bubbles. And each bubble in this huge foam, it represents one universe. Each of the bubbles has different laws of physics, different physical constants. And most of them have the wrong physical constants to be friendly to life. A tiny minority have the right physical constants. And now the Anthropic Principle comes in. We have to be in one of that minority. It's the same argument as we did for the planets, and we're now looking for universes. As physicists say, it's no accident that we see stars in our sky, for a universe without stars would also lack any chemical elements heavier than hydrogen or helium, and so we couldn't exist. If we exist, and we do, then we have to be in the kind of universe that has stars. Satisfactory? No. A truly satisfying explanation, I believe, is sort of at hand. The multiverse plus the cosmological Anthropic Principle explains our friendly universe. This is not unduly extravagant, because the multiverse of bubbles is not actually complicated. It's not complicated in the sense that a designer or an eye or a Boeing 747 is complicated. It's simply extravagant in the sense that there are many, many different bubbles with different laws. And together with the cosmological Anthropic Principle, that takes care of explaining why the universe in which we find ourselves is friendly to us. Secondly, the planetary Anthropic Principle, if it's required, and it may not be, explains the origin of life. And once you've got the origin of life, evolution by natural selection explains everything else that baffles us. It explains the subsequent flowering of life, including brains, human brains, capable of understanding the whole process. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions from the audience. Please ask that you raise your hand and keep your questions to 1 minute. After 1 minute, the mics will be cut off. So please raise your hand. We have 3 mics roaming around. Please go to the mic and ask your question. Thank you. Start there.
Yes?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, my thinking that Christianity is mainly sustained by my belief in an afterlife for those that I've lost, which I admit has the logical basis is completely sustained by faith. And I was just wondering if you have a problem with that type of God.
If I have a problem with?
My belief in God just being sustained by my desire for there to be an afterlife so that people whom I've lost have somewhere else to go after death.
You seem to be saying that your belief in Christianity is based upon your desire for an afterlife. I never believe anything because I want it to be true. I believe it because there's some evidence that it is. You cannot really seriously... You cannot really seriously say that you believe something because it would be nice if it were true. There are all sorts of things which it's very unpleasant to admit that they're true, but it doesn't stop them being true. I think that there's really nothing more to be said about that. If your beliefs are based upon wishful thinking, then that is no basis for believing anything. I fear you're destined to be disillusioned, but of course, neither you nor I, in my worldview, will ever know that. If I'm wrong, maybe we'll both know it.
Over there, Bob. First of all, I want to thank the Clinton School and Mr. Dawkins for making this all possible. I'm very happy to have been here. I'm with a local free thought group, and I'd love to meet anybody here that would like to participate, because next week, yeah, I do. We're having a blood drive to counter Bush's National Day of Prayer, and I want to ask you if you'll help the non-theists by giving blood for our National Day of Reason.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Right here. The mic right here. Back there.
Yeah, I don't think for many hours exhilarating reading and learning, and I hope it's public in my appreciation. Now, the scientific knowledge used in research laboratories around the world to develop cures that relieve human suffering and prolong life is exactly the same one that is proves creationism. So some in academia are worried that one could lose whatever small public support there is for biomedical research in this country by we cannot have your pioneering country. What do you say to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't really hear that. I do beg your pardon, sorry. Perhaps if you said it with the microphone a bit less close to your...
If we go and stress the idea that cures and medical research is based on the same principle that rejects creation, and we propagate this idea because we say so, and because it's the right thing to do to get the public support.
Right. So for
I
example...
do not worry that when I lose, because the majority of people do not support the idea, but when I lose every little public support there is for what is true.
We're going to lose whatever little public support for what is true.
For science, for funding scientific...
If we do what?
If we highlight the idea that the same principles that reject creation,
Yes.
and we want to use every day in our laboratory to make sure.
So you mean that people will be disillusioned about medical research if they think that it's the same principles as reject creationism?
Exactly.
Well, I guess that might be a danger. I don't think it's a good reason to compromise scientific truth, however. I doubt if you do. Perhaps, maybe you don't really mean the same principles that lead us to reject creationism, but the same principles that lead us to reject religion, if we do reject religion. I have often been accused of rocking the boat, and people have suggested it would be much better to be a bit nicer and a bit gentler, and to say, yes, of course, religion and science are entirely compatible, so stop suggesting that evolution leads to atheism, because that way you lose everybody's goodwill. And there's, politically speaking, possibly something in that. I never was much of a politician.
Joseph.
I recently read an article in the New York Times about how across Europe churches are gradually losing attendance as well as monetary funding, whereas here in the United States churches continue to be giving more and more funding, and bolster attendance. Why do you think it is that we in the Americas are more apt to this delusion, whereas the Europeans seem to be becoming less and less deluded?
I honestly don't know. The various theories have been put forward. It is actually, I think, true that this country is uniquely religious in advanced industrial societies, advanced well-educated societies. One suggestion that I've heard is that, paradoxically, it stems from the constitutional separation between church and state. In my own country, Britain, we have an established church, the Church of England. The Queen, the head of state, is also the head of the Church of England. All children, by law, have to be brought up in some sort of religion. There has to be a religious service in school and so on. Quite very, very un-American. The result is that religion has become boring. Whereas in America, it's sort of exciting because since there's a constitutional wall of separation between church and state, religion has become free enterprise. With the same skill as is used to sell soap flakes. Preachers use the same techniques going on television and encouraging vast audiences to give them money so that they can go on television even more and persuade even more people to give them yet more money, build yet more vast mega churches. And these mega churches, I visited one in Colorado Springs, run by a man called Ted Haggard. And it was much more than just a church, it was an entire social system. I mean, there were creches for children, there were basketball courts, though I made that up, but I mean, all that kind of thing, shopping malls, and the whole thing was a huge, tax-free boondoggle. Whereas in Britain, you go into a parish church and you see about 4 old ladies. Had a wonderful Australian colleague who explained the tendency for churches to be filled only with the very elderly. He said, I can't do the Australian accent, but I'll try, cramming for the final. I really don't know why there's this difference between America and Europe. It's a fascinating question and would repay study.
Well, it may be a surprise to you, Dr. Dawkins, but there is at least one place in the New Testament where it uses the language of science. That is the language of proof. And this is where Jesus says, wisdom itself is proven by its results. And this can be followed up by a statement like Ouida, who said, you take hope from the heart of man and you make him a beast of prey. This can be shown to be true throughout history. If you remove God and immortality from man's life, he becomes a beast of prey. We've seen this happen with Nazism and with communism. Now,
10 seconds.
the question is, how are you going to refute this? This is Dostoevsky's question. How do you refute Dostoevsky?
Dostoevsky, in The Brothers Karamazov, suggested that without religion we would all be beasts, as you say, and it's only religion that keeps us from being bestial and horrible. I certainly don't want to believe that. I actually don't believe it. Essentially, all my friends are atheists. None of them are raving beasts. They are actually mostly rather moral, rather gentle people. I was doing a radio talk show in the United States last year on my book tour, and one man phoned in with one of those phone-in programs, and he said that if he was not religious, he would promptly go out and murder his neighbor. Which is a very Dostoevskian view. My reaction to that was, if that's really true, if the only thing that's stopping people murdering and raping and pillaging and stealing is fear of God, what a contemptible reason to be good. The people that I know who are good because they have thought about it. They perhaps thought about the golden rule. They've thought about, would I wish to live in a society where people are totally selfish and look out only for themselves? Would I wish to live among people who have no empathy, no sympathy, no generosity? I wouldn't. I am an atheist who is not a raping, pillaging, murderous beast. I'm, as are all my friends, and I think everybody here probably, gentle, considerate, generous, and it has nothing to do with religion. It's another question what it does have to do with, and that's a mysterious question, and there will be time to go into it. But whatever it is, it can't be religion. For one thing, if it were, you would be following the morals of Scripture, and heaven forbid that anybody should follow the morals of Scripture. I have actually read Deuteronomy, Leviticus. Or if not that, it would be the morals of fear, the morals of fear of being punished, or the greed of being rewarded. And I don't think it's really that either. So it is mysterious where our morals come from, but they don't come from religion, and thank goodness for that.
We have time for two more questions, and we have the book signing. Start with 11.
I want to thank you for a rather splendid conversation and for having the courage to say what you have said in the bottom of the Bible Belt. And while I agree with you that we have to stand in critique of all religions, I think it's too much to throw the baby out with the bathwater. For example, religion at its finest calls forth some of the most noblest ideals of humanity. An example would be in Britain, William Wilberforce, when he argues for the end of the slave trade. And one last point, William Cawley from the BBC in their interview with William pointed out that natural selection does not necessarily lead to atheism. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. William Wilberforce is one of many philanthropic, good people who have been religious, were religious. There are many who were not. There are many evil people who were religious. There are many evil people who were not. I think it probably had rather little to do with it. If you are religious, then you'll doubtless use religion to rationalize your goodness, which may come from other sources. But even if it were true that religious people were more likely to do Wilberforcian good things than non-religious people, that still would not make religion itself true. It would merely mean that it has a good influence. Now, it is possible that things that falsehoods have a good influence. It's possible that to believe a falsehood makes you happier, it might make you nicer, it might make you a better person. I don't believe either any of those. But even if it were true that they made you a better person, that still wouldn't make the factual claims of religion any truer. And as a scientist, I do want to, at the very least, to make a distinction between that which is true about the universe and that which we would like to be true, or that which would make us good if we did believe it. Because making you good is nothing to do with what's true.
Joseph?
Professor, I thought your reference to Deuteronomy was quite clever, but I also don't want to live in a world where we use leeches to cure medicines. We believe the world is flat,
or we look up at the stars and we see things just because we think they're there. And those are very solid scientific principles that have evolved over time, just as religions tend to have evolved. The question I've got though on natural selection is this. There's nothing natural about love. There's nothing at all that suggests that that is the way that a society should grow, that a family should be controlled. I mean, love is something that is against natural selection because it requires sacrifice. And I think the problem I've got is that so many religions, in their essence, basically teach two things. Love God and love your neighbor. Now, if natural selection really is the answer, how can a human brain make that leap of faith to find that love is the way that we should exist?
Right, thank you. Taking the first point first about leeches, it is of course true that just as science has moved on from the time of leeches, so religion has moved on from the time of Deuteronomy. But in a way, that's my whole point. Because those people who claim to base their morals upon religion, either they do base it on Deuteronomy, in which case they're the Christian equivalent of the Ayatollah Khomeini, not the kind of person you want to know, or they have explicitly moved on, and they moved on by a process which is not part of religion, which is part of the same secular evolution of morality as we've all undergone. We are all very different in our moral attitudes from what we were even as recently as 50 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago. So that's the point about leeches. Now, coming on to your point about natural selection, and the claim that there's nothing natural about love, don't be too sure about that. It is true that a naive interpretation of the selfish gene would lead one to say there is no Darwinian benefit in loving or being altruistic, but that would have to be rather naive. My book, The Selfish Gene, could equally well have been called the altruistic organism, because much of the book is about how selfish genes lead to altruistic organisms. The organism propagates its genes most effectively if it not only survives itself, but causes its close relatives to survive, so there you get motherly and fatherly love, you get love of family. It also favours those individuals who take care of, behave altruistically towards other individuals who might at some point in the future reciprocate, pay back a good deed. Both of those sound rather cynical. But if you ask yourself, what would be the actual internal emotions which you would feel if natural selection had pre-programmed you to behave altruistically towards kin and towards neighbours, what would it actually feel like? Our evolutionary past was probably spent in a time when we lived in small bands, perhaps a bit like baboon troops, or in small villages, where the people that you were most likely to meet, maybe the only people you ever met with any frequency, would have been members of your clan, would have been close relatives, and even if not close relatives, would have been individuals that you would meet again and again throughout your life, and who therefore would have been in a good position to reciprocate, to pay back favours. So the rule of thumb that might have been built into our brains in our Darwinian past might well have been, be nice to everyone you meet. Nowadays we no longer live in baboon troops, we no longer live in small villages, we live in big cities. We're not surrounded by kin, we're not surrounded by potential reciprocators, but we still behave altruistically. Well, why wouldn't we behave altruistically? Because a Darwinian rule of thumb in the nervous system is not an all-knowing cognitive understanding of the benefits to selfish genes. It is rather, exactly as I call it, a rule of thumb. We have a rule of thumb to enjoy heterosexual intercourse. The Darwinian reason for that is procreation, obviously. When that rule of thumb was built into our brains, there was no such thing as contraception. Now there is. Therefore, nowadays, heterosexual copulation definitely does not necessarily lead to procreation, but we still enjoy it just as much, we still have just as powerful sexual lust. The conditions have changed, but the rule of thumb is still there. Similarly, our Darwinian past at a time when we lived in small baboon troops would have built into us a lust to be nice, a lust to be loving, a lust to be friendly, a lust to cooperate, empathy, sympathy, the tendency to want to help other individuals in trouble. And even though nowadays we are no longer surrounded by kin, we're no longer surrounded by potential reciprocators, why would that lust not persist in just the same way as sexual lust persists? Nowadays, an earthquake in Southeast Asia kills tens of thousands of people, and we give money to people that we're never going to see in our lives, we don't know personally. We desperately empathize with their suffering. Why wouldn't we? Because our genes were naturally selected at a time when being nice to everybody in distress was something that was favoured by natural selection. So I think you might be wrong in saying that there's nothing natural about love. But even if you're right, even if the Darwinian message is wholly pessimistic, even if the Darwinian message leads you to feel that humanity is a vile and horrible species, that wouldn't make it untrue. Once again, we have to make the separation between that which is true and that which is desirable. As it happens, I don't think there is a distinction in this case. I think that there really is a Darwinian basis for love. But even if there wasn't, even if Darwinism told me that everybody would be bound to be filled with selfish hate, that still wouldn't make it untrue.
We are going to do a book signing now. Just a few ground rules. Please, 2 books per person. And you can buy books over there at G and Wordsworth. The table is over there, so please just form a line towards that way. And let's thank Professor Dawkins one more time.
Extremely kind of you to stand. I can't resist telling you one anecdote, if I may. I was in Brussels last week talking to a member of the European Parliament, and he told me the story of how a few months before President Bush had agreed to come and address the European Parliament in Brussels. But negotiations broke down over one crucial point, which is that President Bush would not come to the European Parliament unless he could be guaranteed a standing ovation.